and then say, hey, my guest on my show tonight is the girl.
Well, I mean, you've just said that because we actually are live.
So. Oh, we're live. Okay, everybody hear me then. Well, welcome, everyone. I hope there's throngs of people out there ready to participate in a fun discussion. We're going to, Jeff and I are going to be talking a little bit about Donald Trump, and maybe other issues will come up. They did announce the cutoff for the debate, the upcoming debate Thursday night, and it sounds like Santorum and Rick Perry, and I don't know if there are a couple others or not, did not make the cut. So I was hoping that Rand Paul wasn't going to make it, but he did.
Okay, so I didn't know that. That's actually news to me. So
that's late news. That was this afternoon. Fox announced it. So a few did not make it. Christie made it. The final ones to make it were Christie and Kasich. So Santorum did not make it, and Perry didn't make it. I think there are a couple others. So they're going to have like a B-list debate for the others that didn't make it. How would you feel if you were in the B-list debate? That sounds like a lot of fun. But anyway, so Trump, of course, is leading the polls, so he obviously was the first to be named. But so we're going to talk a little bit about Donald Trump. I came up with a one-liner about Donald Trump that got a nice reaction on Facebook, and that one-liner was the reason Donald Trump outrages the establishment is that he caricatures it. So we can develop that. Now, Jeff, of course, has written, I don't know, how many articles have you written about Trump now?
Well, I mean,
Trump as fascist, basically.
I keep writing.
And I think that was really important because Jeff wants to point out, and first of all, people need reminding just in general terms that the word fascist is not simply an emotional insult, to condemn anybody you don't like or anybody who's even a little authoritarian. It has a very specific meaning, and you can go online and look up Mussolini's writings and see it's a philosophy. It may be an evil philosophy, or it is, I won't say it may be, but it is a philosophy of the nature of the state and the nature of the individual and the nature of the nation. And so if you read that, and he's very articulate and clear, his writings are very interesting on this point, and there's no mistaking what it is he's talking about, and it's fascinating that someone would be that honest and open. And as Jeff has pointed out, Trump is in that vein. It's not so. It need not be racial. Jeff's article, the one I read at FEE, talks a little bit about his views on Mexicans, but that's, as Jeff goes on to say, it's not essential. So, Jeff, why are you picking on Trump?
I heard him at Freedom Fest, and I was so intrigued at his rhetoric and how he pushed all the right buttons. I mean, fascism is essentially socialism without the unpopular. Socialism has always been a little bit unpopular in the developed world because because of its heritage of attacking religious faith and family and bourgeois institutions. And nationalism, right? I mean, that's sort of, those are the aspects of communism that have never really been very successful at the polls, obviously. So fascism takes, in a sense, the statist elements of socialism and purges it of its politically unpopular elements, and it cobbles together a new political philosophy that's thoroughly nationalistic and statist, but uses the organic matter of the social order to kind of nationalize that, to celebrate national greatness, and with that comes jingoism and nativism, and a profound fear of foreigners. But most fundamentally, fascism has always been about trade protectionism and export monopolism and mercantilism as an ideology, expanding the breathing room of the nation state in order to enhance national greatness and control of the state over the citizenry. And I'm not saying that Trump has read the collected works of Mussolini or something like that. In a way, it's a little bit the reverse. There's an aspect of the bourgeois mind that's a little bit perverse. I mean, there's many beautiful features of the bourgeoisie, obviously, but there's a dark side to it, and fascism taps into that, extracts it, and puts it into a political program. And in the same sense that sort of interwar dictators, Mussolini and Franco, and obviously Hitler, but many other very successful political figures in 20th century history latched on to this vision Trump seems to have inadvertently, or maybe overtly, I don't know, stumbled into this. And I mean, there's no conception in Trump's worldview of a role for individual freedom or a limited government or law as a source of public order. I mean, to Trump, it's all about his will. And it's astonishing to me. I mean, you listen to the guy speak, and it shocks you. And everybody's delighting in this, oh, he's so irreverent, whatever. Well, it's actually outrageous what he says. You know, he openly says that, you know, if Donald Trump, says that Ford has to bring its auto plants home from China and put them in the U.S., that they will definitely do that. That he will announce this, and they will do this. There's also, of course, a love of empire, militarism, and old-fashioned sort of military jingoism. I mean, he stood up there in front of at Freedom Fest and said that he would be a president that would make nuclear weapons matter again, you know, mean something again, and people cheered, you know, so.
Yeah.
This is going on, and Sheldon, what I find most fascinating about this is that we don't have a kind of rhetorical apparatus to account for this combination of views that Trump has. I mean, the idea of fascism has been so thoroughly driven out of public discourse that we don't know what to call this guy, and people are like, oh, well, it's just a random series of ideas, and people call him conservative, people call him libertarian, you know, populist or whatever. No, there's an actual tradition here that he's tapped into, and it means something, and it's robust, and it's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to be with us.
Maybe we should refer to the Trump of the will.
Yeah.
It's a weak pun, a weak pun, but you reminded me of you brought that to mind as you were speaking. You're right. If you all you just need to do is watch him. I mean, and in the way and you've pointed some of this out, in the way he says, the problem with these other guys is they don't know how to make a deal. I'll make a deal. We'll be winners again. They don't know how to be winners. What is he going to be dealing? What's this? He sees, like you said, he wants to be the CEO of the country. He sees the country as a company ruled by by a strong man, but he's seeing it in business terms. And so he thinks the solution to everything is have a tough guy sit down at the table and dictate terms to the guy on the other side of the table. And hey, they'll do it. Remember he said about Ford, don't worry, they'll do it. You know, he's like the Godfather almost. You know, I'll make them a deal, an offer they can't refuse. That's really what he's kind of saying. He reminds me of a quotation from Lord Acton, who of course some of you admire a great deal, Jeff. And everybody knows Lord Acton's famous line about power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But very few people know what he says right after that in that work. He says, quote, "Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority, still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority. Great men are almost always bad men."
Beautiful.
He was he was a historian. He was no slacker when it came to being a historian, Lord Acton. So he knew what he was talking about. This is Trump. It's perfect. There's so much he's done, and you mentioned what he said about nuclear weapons. Let's go the other direction to the more local and quote micro. He said, "I want to restore power to the police." He told CNN, I forget who was interviewing him about that. I want to restore power, even though he was criticizing that last incident, the policeman, with the woman, Sandra Bland. He criticized that policeman. He said, that guy, I'd fire him, he's no good. But he says, I love the police. I want to restore power to the police. First of all, I didn't know they were being deprived power, that he needs to restore it. So he's a very interesting phenomenon. My point about the caricature is I think, most Republicans, and maybe all, I shouldn't say most now that Ron Paul's not in office anymore, all Republicans are latent Trumps when they come right down to it. None of them are calling for getting the government out of all this stuff, everything. They all want to cut the trade deals. When they say free trade, they don't mean unilateral getting rid of all trade restrictions. They mean, oh yeah, we'll cut deals that'll be lower tariffs, but they still want to cut deals that always contain exceptions and
true. I mean,
IP, intellectual property, and stuff like that. So
I liked your statement because I mean it goes into something I did not go into, because I'm really talking about Trump's overt propagandistic rhetorical apparatus, which is so brown-shirty in a traditional way. But ideologically speaking, of course, you're right. The Republic, I think it's true, and it's something we need to deal with and talk about actually as lovers of liberty. The Republican Party really does represent, in a way, the brown shirts, and the Democrats represent the red shirts. I mean, it's much more civilized now. It's filtered through a media apparatus. It's been made respectable and that sort of thing. But with the biases and mainly cultural and social biases are basically still there. I mean, I think it was interesting that Rick Perry blasted Trump's comments on immigration, but didn't actually disagree with him in substance. I mean, he disagreed with the way he said it, but they basically hold the same views.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to point out just real quickly about this Lord Acton statement, which is very relevant, I think, to this discussion. What Lord Acton's comment there was made not in reference to a state official, but rather to Pius IX, a pope. And I think that's extremely revealing. Hardly anybody points this out. What it points out to me is that the evils of power can come from any sector of society. It doesn't have to be a political figure. It doesn't have to be a statesman. It can be anybody with authority. And this and power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely was a hard-hitting attack on Pius IX for calling a council specifically to declare him infallible. And that was the guy he was attacking, because he said, look at this guy, he's got massive power over people, and inevitably that leads to corruption. And so it is with Trump. I mean, he's an entrepreneur, and in some aspects of his business mindset, I admire him, But as lovers of free enterprise, we should not be blind to the realities here. Oppression can come from many sources in society, and the brown-shirted fascistic ideology has typically come from the business-oriented bourgeoisie. Just because you're a capitalist doesn't make you a good guy. That longing for power can come from any source, and wealth can corrupt too. And I think in the case of Trump, that's what's going on. Also, I mean, people are very historically naive about this. I sat there while throngs of Republican activists reveled in Trump's attacks on the status quo and the corruption of the prevailing regime. Well, I mean, every dictator comes in the wake of a collapsing, deeply corrupt, grafting establishment. I mean, they don't emerge out of nowhere. They always come about as an alternative to an existing status quo that everybody's dissatisfied with. So this is what makes me worry, actually, about Trump. I mean, he's clownish and fun at some level, until suddenly he's not clownish and not fun anymore. Yeah. He's actually dangerous. I mean, it has happened, Read The Road to Serfdom.
Well, there was something clownish about Mussolini, but look, he got pretty far, didn't he? But about Trump as a businessman, a couple things need to be said. I know you expressed some admiration, and maybe he's got some legitimate business successes. I did see a biographer of his on TV. I assume this is an unauthorized biographer, who said, he's much more a showman than a successful businessman. A lot of these buildings around the world with his name on them, he had nothing to do with, except he sold his logo, his name. He's very good at peddling his name. It didn't mean he built those buildings or manages those buildings. The other thing is he has used eminent domain repeatedly So he's not against the brutalizing property owners, strong-arming property owners with the help of the state. So imagine giving with the help of the state. So imagine giving him control of the state. So he is no stranger to eminent domain. That is disgraceful. I mean, a businessman who sees eminent domain as a legitimate tool in his toolbox deserves everybody's contempt, but particularly libertarians' contempt.
No, if you steal other people's property, that makes you a criminal. I mean, I remember when. Well, I mean, I hesitate to point it out, but I mean, it just deserves to be pointed out that the Ron Paul machine tried to steal the RonPaul.com. There was a similar sort of situation. It was digital eminent domain, basically, is what was going on with that whole thing. I mean, it's a criminal. Unfortunately, he didn't get away with it, but it's a criminal enterprise.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about Trump that this is something. I mean, there's the famous case of the woman who was, who had a little house. I forget where it is, Atlantic City. I think it was when he was building in Atlantic City. She didn't want to sell to Trump, and they crushed her. She had this little property between two properties that he owned, and they just crushed her. Of course, with the state, and so that's. Yeah, I agree. That's as if he just did it himself, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it was a case taken on by the Institute for Justice, actually. Doesn't it alarm you to some extent, Sheldon, how weirdly adaptable people are in the Republican Party? I mean, Trump was considered. It was never considered even a conservative, much less a libertarian. In all the time I've ever known anything about him, and then suddenly, just like overnight, he becomes like the hero of Rush Limbaugh, I mean,
look how they can rationalize it by saying, "Oh, he's attacking the establishment, so therefore we should be backing him because the establishment's just striking back at him, so he must be a good guy." That's the Limbaugh way of thinking about these things. Not so much the substance. He just outrages, the so-called mainstream, so we must be on his side because the mainstream is attacking him.
Yeah,
and the media is negative about it.
It's far worse. I mean, I don't know if you felt this way, but I mean, and tell me if I'm right or wrong to feel this way, but sometimes when I listen to Trump, I think, as bad as the status quo is, it could be worse, and Trump is worse.
Yeah, and you were making interesting points earlier tonight about socialism versus fascism, and one of the big differences in the presentation of socialism and state socialism and fascism back in the from the 30s, 20s, and 30s onward is that the socialist message was universal and international, right? It was appealing to working people everywhere, not just German working people or French working people, Russian working people. It was a message, regardless of whatever was behind it. It was a message of brotherhood. The hated class were portrayed as expropriators, exploiters, and they were going to be expropriated, right? But it went across. It transcended national boundaries. Fascism has a lot in common with the state socialism as far as state management of the economy goes, even if they keep a facade of private property. But it's always nationalist and ethnic, and it's Aryan or the great Italian people, the great Italian race, or whatever. So it's either racial or just nationalist, right? Italians, Germans, and so it doesn't have this universalist meaning and message, and it doesn't like class analysis because it doesn't like the divisions that produces within the nation, right? It wants a unified nation. Mussolini talked about the nation is one unit. It's the only real thing. The individual is not real. The nation is real. And so you don't want classes, if you're Mussolini, you want classes fighting with each other. That's working against the program. So there's a difference in appeal and a message, even though a lot of the detail is the same as far as managing the economy and things of that nature, violation of civil liberties.
Sense, I mean, fascism is a much smarter ideology from a political point of view than socialism. I mean, socialism has a lot of bad news for people that don't really want to hear. You're going to have to reduce your standard of living these days. what the left says. But in the old days, they were like, the family is actually a regrettable institution. You need to be internationalists. You need to think about other people in other countries, and faith is a something that's clouding your mind, whereas most people are very religious. So socialism has a lot of unwelcome features to its political propaganda that the bourgeoisie just don't want to hear and respond. But fascism actually doesn't. It discards all that stuff. I mean, Trump is Sheldon. I mean, he's trying to appeal to the Christian right, and he's very clumsy about it, right? But he nonetheless does this, and so he's going on about how he's a faithful Presbyterian, and who loves religion and resents it very much that ISIS or something is cutting off the heads of Christians. I mean, the whole thing is hilarious. The idea of Trump marketing himself as basically sympathetic to the Christian right, I mean, it's laughable if you know anything about him. But people in the face of a brown shirt would-be dictator like Trump, who's disrupting the status quo and everything, people will believe whatever they want to believe. They just have to get a little hint. When he gave a speech in Iowa, and of course I'm loving following this guy in a sense. I'm weirdly interested in him, but he's fairly salty-mouthed, right? I mean, he's New York capitalist businessman, so
yeah.
So he uses bad language, So in the course of his speech, he had the masses just, the bourgeoisie just on their feet cheering, until he said the word "damn" and "hell." And the New York Times reported that this got some groans from the audience, and they quoted some pietistic, members of the audience. They were slightly concerned that he wasn't actually born again of Christ because he used that kind of language. This is what we've been reduced to. Never mind that he was in a country with a fascist dictatorship.
When I watch him, I can't help thinking that this is, for a guy like Trump, this is just the ultimate ego trip. I mean, look, the president, for most people, the president is the top of the tree. It's the pinnacle, right, of influence and power. So it's how could he not go for it sooner or later? So I don't know that he even has, who knows what he really believes. In his heart of hearts, he may not be a Mussolini-style fascist, but he just thinks this is the way to win votes and get attention and win appeal. Be my tough self.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's the first time in my lifetime we've seen something this overt like this. Do you remember Ross Perot?
Yeah.
Now, see, he was interesting because he was a similar case of a very successful businessman running on a sort of a populist, let's bring common sense to public policy.
Right.
And he always, but the thing about Ross Perot is that his campaign was that he would run the government like a business. That he would bring rational standards of accounting and accountability and financial, sort of fiduciary rationality to the affairs of public policy. And I remember thinking at the time, well, this is a fallacy. You can't really bring business standards of business to government, But compared to Trump, Ross Perot's ambitions seem relatively humble by comparison, because Trump doesn't want to just subject government to standards of capitalist ethics or whatever. He wants to take over the entire country. That's a different level of.
Yeah, it's more ambitious in a way. No, I think you're right about Perot. Perot would talk about pilot programs for healthcare, where we'll get under the hood. He always used this analogy of on a car. We'll lift up the hood, we'll get in there, and we'll tinker around. We'll try pilot programs. In other words, don't spend billions of dollars on some big program before you know it works. It sounded very practical to people, right? But there was government programs. It wasn't competition in the market. You didn't get that. We'll try a pilot program. If it works, then we increase it. If it doesn't work, we try something else. So that sounded very practical to people. By the way, regarding his success as a businessman, we should understand that he made his money selling Medicaid software to states. So he was a vendor to the 50 states selling Medicaid software. So I don't know if that really counts as a pure market entrepreneur.
Right.
Just to be clear about it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, there was an element of Ross that was always a little bit scary, but nothing compared to this Trump guy.
No, they're different. Well, of course, they're different personalities too, but yeah, they're different and they're making different appeals. One is the super practical guy, and Trump is the god. Like I said, it's like the Godfather, really.
Well, can you tell me something, Sheldon? Because you've been following this closely too. I mean, and you're a little bit of a cynic as regards the right wing in America, and I'm sort of sad at, and you revealed this to me, very thoroughly in the course of our long association. But I mean, aren't you a little bit, even you a little bit startled at how the right wing in America is sort of acquiescing to Trump and not recognizing what he's really all about?
Yeah, they really seem to be. They're like boxers who got surprised by a punch, and they're off balance, and so they're not really sure what to say. They talk about tone, but it's one. It's not illegitimate to talk about tone, but if that's all you talk about, then it seems to me you're saying you don't really have a whole lot to offer to counter this person. And I think it's because he's not that different from them. He's stylistically he's more bombastic and will be more blunt. The funny thing is, Christie must be saying, "What the heck happened? I was supposed to be the blunt guy. Nobody even talks about me, Chris Christie." So he's got to feel the way Hillary felt when Obama jumped in the race. Like, what's going on here? Nobody's supposed to come in, from that wing of the stage. So yeah, they're off balance. They don't really know what to do. I think they're just all hoping, look, let's just ride it out. He'll fade, and then we can go back and play our game. That's what I think. I mean, I'm not an insider. I don't know people who advise them, so I'm just inferring this from afar. But I think that's what I think they're hoping he's going to crash and burn in the first debate. So they may be very surprised if he actually, in a way, holds his own in the show business sense.
The New York Times actually ran an article today saying that Jeb Bush, the Jeb Bush machine, is thrilled about Trump because he has, wiped out all the competition to Jeb Bush, and he's got everybody so alarmed that there's going to be a new tendency to sort of rally around Jeb now as the preferred alternative, the rational.
Because that's assuming he survives.
Yeah.
It's like what Giuliani was saying, hey, don't worry, wait till they get to Florida. I'll take care of them when they go and get to Florida. And it was over before they got to Florida. Yeah. That was one of the biggest blunders ever in politics. So I could see them thinking that, and it may well work out that way. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is really a pretty pathetic crowd of guys, and, of course, there's one woman. Oh, Carly Fiorina didn't make the cut either. Pretty sorry crowd of candidates when you look at it. I mean, Ted Cruz? Is there anybody more smarmy on earth than Ted Cruz? Who would trust Ted Cruz? You wouldn't buy a car from Ted Cruz. I know that's a cliche, but it really applies there. Who'd buy a car from him? And Rubio? I mean, come on. And then Rand Paul, who, I was having a wild fantasy this afternoon about Rand Paul, thinking, not what you're thinking right now, but thinking, wouldn't it be great if Rand Paul finally understood his father after all these years and decided that, then announced that, look, there's no way we can pick Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is the brother and father of the guys that gave us ISIS, for God's sakes. Wouldn't it like shake the country to the very core to have somebody in the Republican Party stand up and talk like that? I mean, he's occasionally hinted at things like that about how we create enemies, but you got to get specific. Go for broke. You're not going to get it otherwise. Attack the Bushes. Come on, and lay it on Jeb. He may say he is not his father and he's not his brother. Well, yeah, he's pretty close to being his father and his brother. Look at his foreign policy advisors. It's all the neocons, Stephen Hadley and all the others, the same guys that gave us Iraq, are advising Jeb. So, they shouldn't be standing around watching Trump. I mean, it's frustrating because I don't think Rand has it in him. I mean, look what he did on the Iran thing with Curry at that hearing the other day. That's a disgrace. and there's no recovery from that.
What did he do?
He lectured Curry and said, how can you say this agreement is going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon when the Ayatollah is saying the agreement is not what's going to stop, it won't stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He failed to mention the next sentence by Khamenei. He said, no, he in effect said, we don't need an agreement to stop us from getting a nuclear weapon. I already issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons. Man conveniently leaves that off and makes it sound like he's saying, hey, this doesn't stop us from getting a nuclear weapon. And Curry, I think Curry tried to answer him, but that didn't even get on TV. CNN was showing Rand's question, but never showed Curry's answer. So the average viewer probably thinks, well, yeah, we shouldn't accept this agreement.
How much of Rand's rhetoric is actually, do you think, designed to get the nomination and appeal to the Republicans' constituencies versus represents his true heart?
Well, I don't know the guy, so yeah, I'm not in a position to answer that. I've never had a private conversation with him. I saw him across a room at Freedom Fest a couple of years ago. That's it. So I have no idea. If it's the second thing, that he doesn't believe it and he just needs to get the nomination, I think it's going to fail. What do we need another guy being bellicose about Iran? He signed Tom Cotton's letter, for gosh sakes.
Yeah.
Well, what more what's he going to do? Suddenly say, and by the way, I'm really a peacenik? That really works well. What did Leonard Reed say? No politician can fly higher in office than he flew getting there. So I think it's irrelevant what Rand really believes, if he really believes anything. And his father must be crying privately because he can't renounce him, but he has nothing in common with Ron Paul.
Well, I mean, it certainly has. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say nothing. I mean, he's probably, in some ways, I mean, his attack on the surveillance state and I mean, I've read his books are generally good. They don't go as far as I would, obviously, but I'm an anarchist. Yeah. Right. He has a lot of libertarian-oriented people around him. But what troubles, I mean, what's interesting to me is what's happened to him in the polls over the last month. That's been a real shock. To fall so dramatically down to something like 6%.
There's nothing to distinguish him.
Yeah.
Maybe it isn't a shock. I mean, why should anybody care about Rand Paul? First of all, people don't seem all that concerned about surveillance. So I'm glad he made did the filibuster on that. I'm glad he did the thing on drones earlier. But I don't think people care about that stuff. So it didn't stick. Maybe there was some immediate reaction in polls around the time of the filibusters, but that doesn't seem to be what motivates people. And so what about him stands out, versus anybody else except Trump with his, bombastic presentation and his apparent, telling it like it is, which there's going to be a segment that likes that no matter what it is. If they think somebody's, calling people names and talking about how they're idiots and all that stuff, yeah, some people like that. I guess that when Christie did it in New Jersey, I guess went over with some people, but he's now been upstaged, and it's a sorry group. I mean, and then what's on the other side? Hillary, maybe Biden. I mean, the phony Bernie Sanders, who is against war, except he votes for every spending bill for war. What did he say? I'm not for open borders. That's the Kochs are for open borders, so I can't be for open borders. There's a man of courage.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Besides, I love poor people unless they're not Americans. Then I don't love them.
There's not that much difference between Trump's policies and Sanders, are there? I mean, they're both.
He's a phony baloney. They're all phonies, and Hillary too. Hillary just decides, I get it. Sanders is out there, and maybe Elizabeth Warren. I guess I better sound like I care about the middle class. All right, I'll make some speeches where it sounds like I care about. It's just show business. Politics is show business. You know that. It's creating a mood to push the right buttons for the constituencies that you think you have a chance to win over. You got to get enough of them together so you win. That's all it is. It's just out there pulling strings and pushing buttons to create an effect. It's all phony, I'm telling you, but Well,
I was appalled by I don't know who disgusts me more, Trump or Hillary Clinton, or Jeb Bush. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to decide, depending on the day you wake up, But her speech on the need to cut energy use. To adjust the global climate, was was one of the most outrageous things I'd ever heard. I mean, just like I wrote in an article that her whole campaign seems to be designed to make F.A. Hayek a prophet. I mean, the use of science in the service of this sort of central planning. She's standing up saying, "Oh, we're going to use 40% less electricity by the year 2030 or whatever it is."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just a level of intellectual pretense, that I hope people can recognize. States can't do that. I mean,
here's what I like. Here's a quote from hers that I like. She said one of her economic speeches, and the irony, of course, would be totally lost on her, right? Too many of our financial institutions are still too complex and too risky. We will ensure that no firm is too complex to manage or oversee. How about that effing state? Is that too complex to manage, Hillary? And doesn't it have to get more complex if it's going to do the additional things you want it to do? I mean, she wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. I might as well be speaking, some ancient language.
No, I mean, the right article to read about Hillary Clinton is the use of knowledge in society. I mean,
she's the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Any room, but except Trump thinks he is. I don't know. Maybe a Hillary Trump race would be kind of fun. I've written that I wanted to see this before Trump really burst on the scene. I was saying I hope it's Clinton and Bush, because what further argument does a libertarian need to make? We just need to point to that ballot and say, what do we need to say, people? Look, it's Clinton versus Bush. Do we need to say anything about the bankruptcy of politics? Isn't that the open and shut argument? Fini, nothing more need to be said. I still think that. So I guess I still hope that Clinton and Bush get the nomination. I don't know. I'm not going to root for anybody.
No,
but Trump has kind of messed that up, I guess.
Yeah, for now. But you're probably right that in the end it is going to be Clinton and Bush, and that will be great propaganda value for our side. What we do about that is the other question. I mean, that could also to really spread a sense of despair. I mean, it's so appalling.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if people are that disgusted. Maybe they'll turn to Trump for a third party.
Well, it's the question of whether or not he will actually do that, and I don't know, and it's hard to see even what motivates him really to do what he's doing so far. I mean, the question is, why is he doing this? And well,
I already told you, it's the ultimate ego trip. I don't know that we need an explanation beyond that.
Yeah. He's just bored.
This is it. This is it. What more do you look? If you're Donald Trump, you think you're the brightest, most successful person already in the world. What's left for president?
Yeah, that's what we've always been taught since grade school. Is that's always the ambition, right? Become president. So. Yeah.
Well, there was a book some years ago that was titled "Anyone Can Grow Up to Be President." It's one of the risks we live with.
That's great. Now, do you find yourself? I'm curious because I know I go through ebbs and flows on this thing. I haven't been interested in politics in probably 10 years. Are you actually following the race? I find that I am. For the first time I think in my adult life, I'm actually interested in the horse race for the first time. What about you?
Well, I'm mildly interested. I don't read the polls every time they come out, but I'll have CNN or MSNBC on now and then, and so I'm hearing enough, I think, to keep up with what's happening in Iowa and New Hampshire and nationally. Like I said, I've been following this horse race to who's going to get on the Fox platform Thursday night. I was kind of interested, and I'll probably watch it just for amusement. I think it's going to be interesting, sociologically, psychologically maybe.
I used to always marvel at the fact that Murray was so interested in politics, and I could never understand it. But this year I'm beginning to kind of get the bug and sort of. I mean, and part of it is a little bit what you just tapped into about the bankruptcy of the whole system. I'm ever more convinced that the state is an obsolete institution. That our lives are changing so dramatically in so many wonderful ways outside of politics, that there's going to be a dramatic paradigm shift in some way, that we're going to realize as a culture and as a people that the answer is not within the structure of the state, but really resides within ourselves and within the class of entrepreneurs who are making our lives better, and our capacity to manage ourselves and our own lives is the only way forward, and not through politics. And what I'm hoping is that our political conditions are going to make this ever more obvious in a way. And this year seems to be designed to illustrate that as just about as best as you could imagine.
Yeah, we need to find the openings that those guys and plus Hillary and Carly give us. I think the state is a zombie, right? It's a walking dead entity. And so it's capable of still doing great damage, like zombies are, but it is dead, and we need to exploit that as best we can. But, I think about this every time I watch these panels on the news talk shows, whether it's about terrorism, they bring on the same experts, quote, terrorism experts, or fiscal or education. I just wonder, do these people, the hosts as well as the so-called experts, ever say to themselves, haven't I been coming on these shows for 10 years or more saying the same thing? Why haven't I realized that this is either just a scam so I can keep making money because I'm an expert, I'm a consultant, but we're just in a rut. We're just saying the same thing all over again. We put a little new ribbon on it and say, hey, well, I got a new idea, but it's the same darn thing with a new ribbon. Does it ever occur to anybody but libertarians to say, don't you people ever listen to yourselves? You were saying that 10, 20 years ago. Nothing has changed except things, a problem got worse. I mean, education is really obvious if you look at education. It's the same darn thing. Now, I realize they have a vested interest in not learning, right? You don't learn what you have no incentive to learn. And they don't have an incentive to learn. The day they renounce it is the day they have to find new work. And maybe the libertarian movement won't employ them, so they got to stick with they got to stick with it. They got to hold on to it because they have an investment. It's their life. It's their livelihood. But I wonder whether 3 in the morning when they're lying in bed in the dark, they're thinking, "Man, what a scam I'm involved in." We propose these solutions, but they're the same ones that have been proposed over and over again, and they never do anything, and the problem gets worse. And not that they even think about the libertarian angle. They would think that they don't even think about liberty. That's not part of it. They're serious pragmatists, but they must realize we never get anywhere. We never make any improvement. So
in so many ways, the system seems so obsolete as compared to how we really live our lives. I mean, everything that's beautiful in our lives, day to day, and ever more so, more intensely so, is a product of the social order. It's a product of free enterprise, of innovation, of the internet, the digital world where the state is comparatively not involved.
Here's a good microcosm, Uber. Uber is a microcosm of the bigger picture, right? Uber comes into a city, and I've written about this. They come into a city, they have a new way of providing transportation, and they don't ask the regulators first. They don't ask the city governments or the county governments, can we do this? They just do it, and everybody's outraged. Wait a second, you can't just come into this town or county or state and do that. Do what? Enable people to give rides to other people? What are we doing here? We're not like blowing up buildings. People are giving people rides, and we're making it a little easier through software. But wait a second, what about the taxi system? What about it? So that's the microcosm, right? People won't think outside of the box. I hate that cliche; it's so overused. But they won't think outside of that boundary, and so they have to defend the old system. Like, well, wait a second, we can't just have you doing this. And very few people, libertarians are the exception, will stand up and say, why the hell not? You tell us why not. The burden's on you. Why not?
And it's a beautiful thing, too. And one of my favorite things to do, and I never get tired of it, is every time I take an Uber, I talk to the driver about his or her life and say, why are you driving? And every time you get an amazing story. Well, I'm an immigrant. Nobody would hire me because my language difficulty is not quite there. Or I'm a single mom, and I don't have any training in anything else. Uber is an opportunity for me, and this allows me to earn enough income to send my children to college and help pay off their debts, or it's always some beautiful story. And recently I took an Uber with a driver from, I forget now what country. It was some African country. I can't remember now which one. And it was so beautiful. He described himself as a venture capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I got this car because I invested in this car. It's my car, and this is my business, and this is what I do. Oh, and Sheldon, I love. There's a weird little revolutionary aspect to all this stuff, because I forget now which. Yeah, it was Atlanta actually. I flew into, and I called Uber, and the guy called me on the phone. He said, "Listen, I'm not permitted to pick you up at the anywhere near the taxi stand on that level. But if you come downstairs, and go to the certain area, and it turned out to be for the U.S. Postal Service, then I'll just pick you up there. And if anybody asks you, just say I'm your friend, and you're picking me up. They can't make that illegal." And it worked. I was upstairs, and I said, "Well, how do I get downstairs?" And he said, "Well, there's an escalator right over there." And I said, "Oh, okay." I went downstairs and went through there and hopped in my friend's car, which he was paid to do, later through this application. But it was beautiful because every regulation was designed to prevent this, but because he's desperately in the need of serving me at a profit. You're
right about the drivers being on top of things. My Uber story, when I was still in Little Rock, I had on a couple of my rides I had the same driver, a guy named Marco, really great guy. And then so one night I was going over to the Little Rock Council to watch a hearing on Uber because they were reconsidering their regulations to let them, they were holding them up for money, but extorting money out of them, but they were going to let them operate. So I got the same guy. Marco picked me up. So I said, "I'm going over to the city hall," whatever they call it. He said, "Oh yeah, I'm going too. I'm going to the hearing too." So he drove me over, and then we walked together into the hearing because he was there to see what was going on. He has a stake in it. So it was successful, within that context. And as we're walking out, we're chatting and saying, "Okay, that went pretty well." While we're walking out, I'm tapping on my phone to get an Uber driver, and it rings his phone. He said, "Okay, I guess I'm taking you home."
That's so beautiful. And what's interesting too, and I'm sure you've thought about this. I'm intrigued by it because the problem we've always had in the past is that benefits of statism are so concentrated on behalf of a small interest, and the costs are diffuse among the whole population. And so the calculus of the public policy has always tended towards favoring state means. But with peer-to-peer technology like this, and Uber's not the perfect example, but we're getting there. Mm-hmm. You spread out the benefits of freedom and the costs of shutting down that freedom are concentrated on such a small few. And the benefits of the freedom are so dispersed, and the costs of getting rid of that freedom are felt by ever more people, whether it's Airbnb or Jackrabbit or Odesk or eBay or Bitcoin for that matter. Mm-hmm. It almost seems like are we on the verge of actually shifting that sort of Buchananite calculus of consent?
Interesting way to put it. Yeah.
In a revolutionary direction, so that the average person has such a stake in preserving and freedom that maybe that changes the political dynamics. Actually,
it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you could be right. I mean, I think this sharing economy, they're calling it now, holds the potential to bring radical change, because I think people can grasp it. It's not difficult to grasp. Well, now they know what Uber does and Lyft and Airbnb, like you mentioned, and people are going to see that the government and vested interests are standing in the way, and I think they're not going to like that because the benefits to them are so
intense,
obvious,
and
like you say, spread. So it means a lot of people see the benefits
it's all because we have
and see what they'll be deprived of if the stodgy old establishment defenders, have their way.
And we have the technology now to make use of these idle resources. I mean, if you have an extra room in your home, that
Yes.
that nobody's taken up. I mean, it just takes 2 seconds to go on Airbnb and list it and say, I've got an extra space. You're welcome to stay here in exchange for money. And because the Keynesians used to complain about the inefficiency of idle resources, right? And it turns out the market is actually figuring out a solution to this. It's not the state, right? But Airbnb is making a joke out of zoning laws and regulations on hotels and tax laws and just everything. I mean, it's like represents a fundamental challenge to the paradigm of control and central command.
Yeah. To bring this full circle, I wonder what Trump thinks of all this stuff. I mean, not to be funny, but I haven't heard that he made a comment or anybody's asked him. I wonder what he'd say about Uber and these other.
I wonder. Well, did you see Hillary Clinton's speech where she actually specifically targeted?
Yeah. What did she say? Do you recall what she said? I'm trying
to. Well, she attacked what she called the gig economy, and what's going on is that she wants them redefined by the tax law.
Oh, that they're not subcontractors.
They're not contractors.
Independent contractors.
Employees.
That's vicious.
That's really wicked, because if you become an employee, then suddenly you get subject to all the mandated benefits and withholding.
It'll destroy the business model.
Yeah, it destroys the business model.
And I imagine those drivers aren't going to like that. So.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, she tried to also say something positive, right? She really tried to play it both ways, didn't she? I remember the news accounts.
Well, she's, I think, she and Obama and the rest of the people on the left, they always give some rhetorical sort of, a pitch towards innovation and that sort of thing. But yeah, so she wants the innovation, but she wants to reclassify all these contractors, independent contractors, as being employees of a firm. Which is another way of just rolling them into the state-based system, basically, which is what being an employee today is. You're part of the state apparatus. Contracting the gig economy is sort of a kind of a secession away from the post-war sort of wage system of imposition and control. Which, by the way, I have to credit you for. Alerting me to this. I mean, I think too often free marketeers are overly sanguine about the normal sort of corporate wage system. I mean, it's fully controlled by the state entirely.
Yeah, why does she think that's an appealing line to take? If she's trying to be the champion of the middle class, she's telling all these people who are actually taking advantage of this opportunity, being a Uber driver or doing something else in that regard, being involved in, I guess Airbnb wouldn't count in that. But these people that are driving love the flexibility. They can turn off the software, the app, whenever they want if they don't want to get calls, and jump in whenever they want. I mean, it's up to them. How do you preserve that and define them as employees? Why does she want to alienate that group of people?
I mean, I don't know if you're asking the question, but I mean, it seems to me that it's all about sanctioned labor, state-based labor unions and their contributions to the Democratic Party. I mean, it seems to be the whole thing.
That's probably something to do with it.
I mean, how long have labor unions been, working hand in glove with the state now? Since almost 100 years, probably. Right.
Yeah, she's, assuming she's going to be the nominee, she's got a lot of vulnerabilities that libertarians ought to be able to exploit, both on the foreign policy side, because, a lot of the mess that's going on now, she is one of the prime causes of, by her pushing for war in Libya. Of course, she also voted for the Iraq war. But then also this domestic stuff. And we ought to really... I'm not saying she'll become aware of our criticism and have to respond to it, but we really ought to make as a public a show of this, that she's she's on the wrong side of history, so to speak.
She really is.
By wanting to interfere with Uber drivers and stuff like that.
I have and I hate to roll back the conversation just a little bit, because we all have a story about Uber drivers, but I had a funny thing, Sheldon, that thing happened to me. I was at an airport. I think it was in Toronto. I'm not sure. I have to think this through. But a guy comes up to me, because I was looking lost, because I'm in a foreign airport. I don't know where I am. The guy comes up to me and says, "Listen, buddy, would you like a ride?" I said, yeah, actually I would. He said, well, come on, let's go. And I said, well, how much is it going to cost to get to such and such hotel? And he tells me. And so I get in the car, and he was so nice and so friendly. I said, say, by chance, are you an Uber driver? He said, no. No, I used to be. I quit. I said, oh, really? When did you quit? He said, well, about 5 minutes ago.
5 minutes.
And I said, well, do you think there's any chance that you'll become an Uber driver again? He said, yeah, I think there's a good chance. I said, when do you suppose that's going to happen? He said, well, probably after I drop you off.
That's good. Yeah, in Little Rock, if you only want to go a close distance, like to one of the hotels, but the shuttle maybe takes too long, the hotel shuttle, maybe they don't have one or it takes too long, the cab drivers won't take it because it's too short a distance. The Uber drivers will.
Yeah. So I remember I was in Wichita, and I asked the hotel clerk, I said, do you have Uber in Wichita? And she said, oh, no. I keep hearing rumors are coming, but we don't have them yet. And I said, well, great. Well, can I get a cab? She said, yes. And I said, well, how long do you think it'll take? She said, well, about 45 minutes before they get here. But I just don't have that kind of time. So I pulled up my app, and I pressed the button for Uber, and there were 3 drivers within a square mile.
Yeah. No, I know. We're turning this into an Uber love fest, but the first time my wife and I used Uber, we were standing outside of our apartment in Little Rock. North Little Rock. We never used it before, so we punched it in. It was free in the early days because they wanted to. They didn't want to totally upset the city, so they were giving the service away to establish themselves while they, also were smoothing the political side of it. But so we punched it in, and we didn't really know what to expect. I'd read about it, but not in real detail. So I put it in, and then suddenly you say, wait a second. A guy named Marco in a white Jetta, I think it was, a Volkswagen, I don't know, GTE or something, is going to be coming here, and it says he's 2 minutes away. Then the next thing I know, there's a map showing his little car, a little icon of a car coming through the streets. And then I said, look, he's just around the corner from us. And sure enough, there he is coming around. I mean, I had no idea it was all that. Plus, you get his phone number. You have his license tag, so you know it's him. You can text him or call him. He gets out of the car and says, hi, I'm Marco. Well, I already knew who he was because it said it on the phone. We get in the back of his car. It's a 4-door car. There's water. There's candy. It's perfectly clean. Yeah. Cheryl was very dubious. She said, you sure we should be... Before we were just getting started, she said, should we really be doing this? Because, you're getting into a car. I said, you know who the taxi driver is if you take a taxi? Of course you know. So she was so delighted. She was sold with that one experience.
What's interesting, too, is that not many people understand this, but they get to rate you also as a passenger.
Yeah, exactly.
To pick you up. I was recently somewhere. And I called an Uber, and he arrived with the van, and I had a big crowd of people that crowded into the van, and they were being a little bit, maybe, sort of, how should I say, slightly inappropriate in the way in which people tend to be if they've had too much to drink. So I nudged everybody. I said, listen, everybody, this is not a cab.
Yeah.
I will be rated for how you behave. And so immediately all my friends shaped up.
So it has a civilizing effect, Uber.
It really does. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that there's this kind of a slightly regrettable tradition, with municipal cabs, that if you grab one late at night in a big city and you've had a lot to drink, you can be a little bit, people tend to get a little out of hand, in the way they talk to the cab drivers too,
Yes.
So yeah, it makes everybody on both ends of the exchange nice. I mean, markets are beautiful in that way. They inspire people to be responsible and to care about their reputations. And
yeah, great. And who knows what's to come from this? Who thought of Uber except for the couple of entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
What's tomorrow? What's coming tomorrow or next week?
Well, there's so much beautiful things emerging out of technology, and I hope that we get to hold another hangout, because I would love to talk to you about this in more detail. But
yeah, let's do it.
Whole disintermediation of the world,
Yeah.
We seem to be picking up where we left off at the late 19th century, where we saw so much progress,
Mm-hmm.
and then this rotten thing called the total state just sort of put this big parentheses around progress, and the 21st century seems to be sort of fixing that, and this is one of the reasons I laugh at I mean, I'm a laugh and I'm alarmed by people like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Yeah, they're dinosaurs.
Yeah, they want to throw us back. They want
They're
to throw us back. Yeah, they seem to be running for president in 1950 or something like that. I don't know.
We need to wrap up. I'll do a quick plug. People can find my writings at Free Association. That's my blog, sheldonrichman.com. Also, Reason picks them up, and Liberty.me. Of course, I have my page at Liberty.me where everything I write gets there, so check it out. I just want to also make another plug. I'm going to be doing a Liberty.me conversation with Walter Block about left libertarianism. That's on the 28th of August. That's a Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So
God,
that should be fun. Walter's fun, and we're not calling it a debate. We're calling it a conversation.
That is going to be awesome. That's
moderated by Lucy Steigerwald, my usual sidekick here.
Oh my God, that's on the 28th.
Jeff, thanks for joining us. It's an honor, a pleasure.
It's great to be with you, Sheldon, again.
I enjoyed it, and I look forward to more writing by you about Trump.
Okay, take care, my friend.
Good night, everyone.